JRPG intros tend to get a bad rap, especially back then. This is largely in part due to the general consensus about the genre, that it's slow and complicated. And it's not like it's unsubstantiated. JRPGs do tend to take their time. Whether it's the beginning of the game or the overall runtime, the genre is known to take several hours to finish. In the case of an intro, a long or complicated one is a hard sell to players both old and new. It's quite a shame really. A well-done intro can do a lot, and I'm not just talking about capturing a gamer's attention. I'm talking about creating a foundation for the plot and a proper introduction to the game's mechanics. A JRPG intro is not just a set of cinematics with pretty graphics and the start of the plot. Rather, it's the entire time it tries to engross and educate the player about the world and its mechanics. And with that all laid out, I honestly believe that Final Fantasy IX is able to do all of that, making it in my eyes one of the best intros in JRPGs. So before I continue, I would like to mention a few things. First off, I'm not saying FF9 has the definitive best intro. It's only one of them. Second, FF9 was released in the year 2000. Decades have passed and games have definitely improved since then. Despite saying this, the third point is arguably older JRPGs have done better than FF9. Heck, you don't have to check too far. FF6 and FF7 arguably have better intros. Fourth, this is not a scientific study. I'll try my best to be objective, but I'm not doing things empirically. No maths will be shown, and most of what I'll say are from my observations of the game and the genre. Lastly, spoiler warning. So if you haven't played the game, you might want to stop watching the video. With those out of the way, let's start. What I consider the intro sequence of FF9 would be the first FMV up to the end of Vivi's run in Alexandria. To give you an idea of how long that is, it's around 3 to 4 individual scenes or events. Looks plenty, but since this is a JRPG, it's actually tame. I firmly believe it embodies what JRPG intros are supposed to do. Start the plot and introduce the most common and constant game mechanics. Now, one can argue that the intro really ends at Steiner's section upon climbing the tower or at the end of Evil Forest. However, by that time, the first story arc is already underway in the case of the former and is ending for the latter. So we've definitely passed the actual game intro. If I want to be diplomatic about this, I would call that entire section the extended intro, since the game is still teaching you things. However, I'd counter-argue that what's taught there are supplementary, building on the mechanics that you have learned beforehand. So, yeah. The game starts with an FMV. We have two ladies on a boat while in a storm. The scene cuts to a princess who seems to have woken up from the previous event as if it were a dream. She fixes herself and proceeds to look out the window, where it then proceeds to show her current location. The screen turns white and a flock of birds are shown flying with a giant airship. After a few more shots of the airship, it then transitions to the interior, where a blonde and tailed character drops down from a pole. Said person enters a room which the FMV follows into. It may not look too much, but the first cinematic has provided us with a lot of data. For starters, while the boat scene is presented like a random thing, the fact that it cuts to the princess shows that the event is related to her. We just don't know at this point how important the scene is and when was it. Also, since we are shown the princess for quite some time, we can infer that this character is rather significant. I know that to an extent this is a trope, but it doesn't make it inconsequential. The cinematic showing us her location tells us a few things. First, she is in a castle and some form of noble. Second, this game's world has a medieval style. And third, there's this unspoken confirmation that this is where current events will take place. I get that these can be deduced by anyone if they pay attention, as well as the fact that the place's name isn't known to us. However, you gotta admit that this is still a presentation of information, a good case of telling by showing. Moving on, we are confirmed of the existence of airships. Since it's moving, and with the amount of time used to show the kingdom from before, we can infer that the ship is going towards the location. In the ship interior, aside from the obvious fact that the guy is a personal of the ship, it also confirms to us that there are humanoid creatures in this game. Not really a big reveal if you consider the genre in its entirety, but it's still a cool detail to take note of. Lastly, since the end of the FMV attempts to follow the character into the room, we can assume that the next scene would be there, which it does. And it's at this point that the player gets his first taste of freedom. freedom to control a character, to try the controls, to explore the room, and to access in-game menus. Basically, the game is encouraging you to try anything and everything and absorb as much information as you can without outright telling you to press X, do Y, or some Z. If you play your cards right, a lot of things will be introduced to you, such as the incentives of exploring a location, the existence of interactable objects, and a slew of information that gives you a good idea of who your nameless character is and what he is capable of. The game does have a failsafe though, and frankly, this is fine. The game does want you to progress the game after all. Upon lighting the candle, a quick chat leads to the naming of the character. Here we learn his default name and given the ability to provide a different one. Again, not that big of a deal in terms of the genre, but still great to know. After the name fiasco, a few more words are exchanged until a dragon-looking entity enters the room and puts you in your first battle. I would like to mention that this is the most monumental part of these sequences. Some JRPGs tend to spend too much time before the first encounter that, frankly, it gets boring. It really helps that the first fight is within the first 5 minutes of the game. It lets the player get immediate first-hand experience of the battle system and how it works. Like, how many characters are allowed in a party? Is it turn-based? And if so, how does it work? What are the available commands? How to heal and revive knocked out characters? What's the general difficulty? And so on. Again, telling by showing. After the fight, the group of characters before us continue their discussion. It's here that we are properly introduced to them and informed of their current objective. This scene, for as quick as it is, answers a few of our questions. First, the kingdom from before is called Alexandria. Second, that the lady from before is Princess Garnet. Third, that her mom's name is Queen Bran. And finally, the game tells us of the first plot point. Moving on, another FMV plays. This time, it shows a humanoid character with a brown hat in a plaza. The giant ship from earlier flies above the town and the game's title is finally shown. While a shorter cinematic than the first, this tells us that the ship is finally in Alexandria and that the weird character from before is in the vicinity as well. We are now on the last and longest part of the intro. We are playing the character from earlier and the game officially confirms to us that we are indeed in Alexandria. Again, the game gives us complete freedom to do whatever except leaving it. This is the game's way of keeping us away from danger and to keep the story moving. Anyways, think of this as an extension of the ship room from earlier. This is either the chance to apply what you've learned in a bigger area, or your second chance to learn the mechanics from before. Furthermore, this part teaches us another aspect, how towns work and ways of progressing the plot. Sadly, while the usual town services aren't available, we are at least confirmed of their presence. And if you play your cards right, you'll learn about the existence of minigames earlier, as well as a few world building. Moving on, interacting with the 10 in town continues the plot. We learn that the little guy is here to watch the show in town only to find out that his ticket is a fake. In an attempt to cheer him up, the person behind the counter gives him a set of playing cards as well as a person to ask about said cards. So we learn why our character is in town and are introduced to another minigame if you choose to learn about it. You go to an alley, meet this rat kid who claims to know how to see the show at the expense of your free will, and you both sally off. At this point, another part of town opens up for you to explore, or you can directly follow Rat Kid into a tower. He would order you to climb the ladder first. You attempt to climb said ladder, but a pink plump creature falls on you first. The game then introduces us to Kupo, the Moogle who then proceeds to talk about the services he provides. We're also introduced to Stillskin, but the function he serves is smaller than Kupo and is for the later parts of the game. And it's at this point that we learn the most important mechanic of the game, how to save your progress. This is obviously crucial as we don't want to restart this game from scratch every time we load it up. There are also other things this section teaches us like how tents work, and Magnet, the game's in-game Moogle mail service which serves as a form of world building. After talking to the Moogles, we follow Ratkit into the rooftops and we get this section where wooden boards fall after passing through it. Immediately after, we are finally introduced to the two characters. Ratkid is actually named Puck and our character is named Vivi. From here, the game kinda guides you into finishing this section, but frankly, you do have some limited freedom, especially on the side of exploration. Anyways, finishing this section ends our current control of Vivi. This final section teaches us one final thing, that there are points of no return. Not in the modern sense where your decisions matter, but more of a reminder that there are sections where you have no choice but to keep moving forward. It's a small detail, but arguably a major one. And with that, we've learned most, if not all, of the major mechanics of this game. The game will introduce a few more mechanics and information as you progress. However, I view them as additional elements that build on the foundation laid out by the intro. I'm not saying they aren't important, but I won't necessarily deem them as crucial. If you look at what we've discussed, it's rather interesting and incredible how FF9's intro was designed. A lot of information was condensed yet properly disseminated in a short amount of time. A combined approach of teaching by experience and literal guides turn what could have been the most drawn-out section of a game into an efficient use of time and resources. The whole experience is under 40 to 45 minutes, which I understand is not that amazing in the general sense, but in terms of the genre, that's good time management. I don't believe the game is being stingy in terms of information, but rather rewards players who are keen observers and those willing to deduce what's in front of them. And if you step away from the gameplay elements and focus on the narrative, it's not bad either. Everything is properly paced, nothing felt drawn out or overwhelming. The scenes presented look interesting that it compels us to move the story forward. There was enough to keep us informed, but also guessing. It's this design direction that convinces me that this game has one of the best intros in JRPGs. This proper weaving of narrative and gameplay that doesn't collide and cancel out. Rather, they help one another, creating this partnership that helps not only the game, but also the player. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.